They didn't just laugh at me, they turned it into the night's entertainment. My mother raised her champagne flute, telling the room I was still making up boyfriends, while my father smiled, his hand tightening around a legal folder I recognized. My cousin's engagement party felt less like a celebration and more like a setup. I knew exactly what they planned to steal from me. They just didn't know my fiancé wasn't imaginary. He was simply late on purpose. My name is Stella Davis, and if there is one thing I have learned in 35 years of being a daughter to Mark and Diane Davis, it is that they never do anything without an audience. The gravel crunched beneath the tires of my rental car as I pulled up to the valet stand. The venue was one of those aggressively rustic luxury barns in the Hudson Valley. The kind where the exposed beams were reclaimed from a factory that burned down in the 1800s, and the chandeliers were worth more than my first apartment. It was a cold November evening, the air sharp enough to sting the inside of your nose, but the warm glow spilling from the massive double doors promised heat, expensive wine, and the specific brand of psychological warfare my family called a celebration. I took a breath, holding it in my lungs for a count of 4. Before exhaling, I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked calm. I looked put together in a navy silk dress that draped without clinging. My hair swept back in a low, severe bun. I did not look like the unstable, flighty spinster my mother enjoyed painting me as. But the moment I stepped out of the car and handed the keys to the valet, I felt the shift. It is a physical sensation, like walking into a room where the air pressure is slightly too high. My cousin Brianna Holt's engagement party was in full swing. 300 guests were already mingling under the vaulted ceiling, a sea of velvet blazers and sequined cocktail dresses. I had barely made it past the coat check when I heard it. My mother's voice. It cuts through ambient noise like a diamond drill bit. "Oh, Stella," Diane Davis was saying to a group of my aunts near the entrance. "She is coming alone. Again." I paused. Lingering in the shadow of a massive floral arrangement, I watched my mother hold court. She was wearing silver, standing straight as a rod, her face arranged in that perfect mask of long-suffering maternal concern. "We keep telling her there is no shame in being single," Diane continued, her voice pitching up just enough to ensure the table of neighbors behind her could hear. "But she insists on this story about a fiancé, a man nobody has ever met. It is heartbreaking. Really, we just play along to keep the peace," Aunt Carol tisked, shaking her head. Still, I thought she would have dropped that by now. "She is committed to the bit," Diane sighed, taking a sip of her champagne. "Ask her about him if you want to laugh. Ask if he is real this week." I stepped into the light. "Hello, Mother," I said. The group jumped. Diane did not flinch. She simply turned, her eyes scanning me from head to toe, looking for a loose thread, a chipped nail, anything she could use. When she found nothing, she smiled. It was a terrifying expression, all teeth and zero warmth. "Stella," she said, leaning in for a kiss that barely grazed my cheek. "You made it. And look at you. You are alone. What a surprise." "Grant is parking," I said smoothly. The circle of women exchanged glances, a few stifled giggles. Diane actually laughed, a bright tinkling sound that made my stomach turn over. "Of course he is," Diane said, patting my arm with patronizing gentleness. "He is always parking, or working late, or out of the country. It is fine, darling. You do not have to lie to us. We are family." She turned back to the guests, effectively dismissing me. "Go get a drink, Stella. You look like you need one." I walked away, keeping my spine rigid. I could feel their eyes on my back. I could feel the whispers starting, the old narrative settling over me like a heavy coat I hadn't agreed to wear. Poor Stella. Crazy Stella, making up men to feel important. I navigated the crowd, nodding at people I had known since childhood, people who now looked at me with a mixture of pity and amusement. I made my way toward the bar. But my eyes were not scanning for a drink. I was looking for my father. I found Mark Davis near the head table. He was talking to a local councilman, laughing at something the man had said. But his eyes were cold, darting around the room. He looked the part of the benevolent patriarch in his bespoke tuxedo, distinguished and gray-haired, but it was what he was holding that made my blood run cold. In his left hand, tucked against his side like a weapon, was a thick blue folder. It was out of place. This was a cocktail party. People held clutches, champagne flutes, hors d'oeuvres. They did not hold legal-sized document folders with reinforced corners. It was the kind of folder you brought to a closing table when you wanted signatures, not photographs. I watched him from across the room. He wasn't setting it down. He wasn't handing it to an assistant. He was gripping it. His knuckles were white. I felt a presence at my elbow and turned to see my younger sister, Sloane. Sloane was 32, blonde, and perfect. She was the golden child, the one who had followed the script. She married the right man, bought the right house, and played the game exactly how our parents wanted. Tonight, she was wearing a shimmering gold dress that caught every light in the room. "You came," Sloane said, her voice dripping with sweet poison. She linked her arm through mine, steering me not toward the bar, but toward the center of the room, where the crowd was thickest. "I was invited," I said. "We honestly didn't think you would show," Sloane said, beaming at a passing guest. "Mom said you might be too embarrassed, about the whole fake engagement thing." "It is not fake, Sloane." Sloane squeezed my arm, leaning in close. "It is okay. Stella, really, we are just worried about you. It is not normal to lie like this at your age. But don't worry, Mom and Dad have a plan to help you out, to take some of the pressure off." I stopped walking. "What does that mean?" Sloane blinked, her eyes wide and innocent. "Just that we want you to be happy, without all the burdens." She pulled me forward again. "Come say hi to Brianna. She is the bride. After all, try not to make it about yourself for once." We reached the center where Brianna was holding court. My cousin looked radiant, genuinely happy, flushed with wine and compliments. She spotted me and squealed, reaching out to hug me. "Stella," she cried, "I am so glad you are here." "Where is this mystery man I told the caterer to set an extra plate just in case?" Before I could answer, Diane appeared. She materialized out of the crowd like a shark surfacing. "He is not here, Brianna," Diane announced, loud enough to silence the immediate vicinity. "Stella's fiancé is detained, indefinitely." The laughter that rippled through the group was sharp. I saw Brianna look confused, her smile faltering. She didn't want to be mean, but she didn't know how to stop the momentum my mother was building. "Actually," I said, my voice steady, "he is just running a few minutes late." "Stop it," Mark said. I hadn't seen him approach. My father was suddenly there, standing right behind Diane. The blue folder was still in his hand. He looked at me with eyes that were hard as flint. "Stop the performance, Stella," he said quietly. "It is embarrassing. For everyone." He placed the folder on the table next to the champagne tower. It landed with a heavy thud that seemed louder than the music. It sat there, stark and threatening among the crystal glasses and white roses. "We are going to have a toast soon," Mark said, checking his watch. "A special family toast. We need you up front." "I am fine back here," I said. "No," Diane said. Her hand clamped onto my shoulder, her nails dug in through the silk. "You are family. You will be up front. We have an announcement to make. About you." My phone buzzed in my clutch. I knew who it was. I didn't need to look. But I needed the anchor. I pulled away from Diane's grip, ignoring her hiss of disapproval, and opened the small beaded bag. The screen lit up with a text message. "Grant parking. 7 minutes. Do not sign anything." My heart hammered against my ribs. 7 minutes. Grant Ellison. He was not imaginary. He was a corporate attorney who specialized in hostile takeovers, a man who viewed chaos with the clinical detachment of a surgeon. He was also the only person who had ever looked at my family and seen them for exactly what they were. "Do not sign anything." I looked up. Mark was watching me. He saw me check the phone. He smiled. A small, condescending twist of his lips. He thought I was checking a fake message. He thought I was pretending to text a man who didn't exist to save face. Put the phone away. Stella, Mark said. It is rude. Just checking the time, I said. Time for what? Sloane asked, giggling. For your imaginary friend to arrive. Time for the truth, I muttered. What was that? Diane asked sharply. Nothing, I said. I am ready for the toast. Diane clapped her hands. Wonderful. DJ, cut the music, please. The music faded. The chatter in the room died down as 300 faces turned toward the champagne tower. Diane stepped forward, dragging me with her. She positioned me right next to the table, right next to the folder. I stood there, feeling the heat of the spotlights. I felt like a prop. Everyone, Diane's voice projected effortlessly. If I could have your attention, we are so thrilled to celebrate Brianna and David tonight. But we also wanted to take a moment for a little family housekeeping, a moment of honesty. She put an arm around me. The crowd cooed. To them, it looked like a loving mother embracing her daughter. To me, it felt like a python constricting its prey. My daughter Stella, Diane said, looking at me with theatrical pity. She has had a hard year. We all know about the struggles, the stories. She paused for effect. A few people chuckled. She tells us she is engaged, Diane continued, rolling her eyes playfully. She tells us he is rich, he is handsome, he is successful, but funny enough, on the night of the engagement party, he is nowhere to be found. Roars of laughter. It crashed over me. I saw people pointing. I saw Sloane covering her mouth to hide a smirk. So, Diane said, shouting over the laughter. Mark and I decided it is time to step in. Stella can't seem to keep a relationship straight, and she certainly can't manage her other responsibilities alone. We are done watching her struggle. Mark stepped forward. He placed his hand on the blue folder. He tapped it twice. We have prepared a solution, Mark said. His voice was deep, authoritative. To ensure that family assets stay with the people who are actually building a future, the people who are living in reality. He looked at me. It wasn't a look of love. It was the look of a predator who had finally cornered the prey against a wall. You are going to fix this, Stella, Mark whispered to me, low enough that the microphone didn't catch it. Tonight, in front of everyone, so you can't back out later. I looked at the folder. I knew what was inside. The deed to Foxmere House, the transfer papers, the end of my independence. They had staged this entire night not to celebrate Brianna, but to publicly shame me into submission. They were banking on my fear. They were banking on the fact that I would do anything to stop the laughter, anything to get out of the spotlight. They thought I would sign my life away just to make the scene stop. I looked at the crowd. I looked at Diane, preening. I looked at Mark, his hand heavy on the paperwork. I smiled. It was a soft smile. The kind of smile a woman wears when she has been beaten down so many times that one more blow doesn't matter. But inside, my pulse was steady. 7 minutes. Grant had said 3 minutes had passed. I just had to survive 4 more. Well, Diane asked loudly, turning to me. What do you have to say? Stella, tell everyone. Is he coming? The room went silent, waiting for the punchline, waiting for me to stutter, to make an excuse, to cry. I smoothed the front of my dress. I looked my mother in the eye. He is on his way, I said clearly. The laughter that followed was the loudest yet. It was raucous, cruel, dismissing. Diane shook her head, playing to the crowd, shrugging as if to say, I told you so. Mark opened the folder. He uncapped a heavy fountain pen and set it down on the paper. We tried, Mark said to the room, acting the martyr. We really tried. He pushed the folder toward me. I stood my ground. I didn't reach for the pen. I didn't reach for the drink. I just stood there, letting the humiliation wash over me, knowing that every laugh, every jeer, and every lie they told was being witnessed. They were building the stage for their own destruction, and they didn't even know the curtain was about to go up, to understand why I stood there in silence while 300 people laughed at me. You have to understand the architecture of the Davis family. It is a structure built on very specific foundations, and everyone has an assigned load-bearing wall to support. Sloane is the ornamentation. She was born to be adored, to shine in photographs, to marry well, and to reflect glory back onto our parents. When Sloane makes a mistake, it is a charming quirk. When she overspends, she is stimulating the economy. When she fails, she is a victim of circumstance who needs a soft place to land. Brianna, my cousin, is the celebrated guest star. She is close enough to be family, but distant enough to be treated with the best manners. She gets the applause without the pressure. And then there is me, Stella. I am the utility room. I am tolerated because I am useful. I am the one called when the taxes need filing, when the reservations need to be disputed, or when a literal body needs to be buried, metaphorically speaking. Of course, though I sometimes wonder if Mark would call me for that too. My role is to absorb the unglamorous reality of life so that Sloane and my parents can continue living in their curated fantasy. Growing up, I learned very quickly that in our house, history was not a fixed record of events. It was a fluid substance that my parents sculpted to suit their mood. They never attacked me with loud voices or raised hands. That would have been too crude for Mark and Diane Davis. Instead, they rewrote narratives. They did it so gently that for the first 20 years of my life, I believed them. If I got straight A's, Diane would tell the neighbors I studied too much because I had no social skills. If I made the varsity swim team, Mark would sigh and say it was good. I found a sport that hid my face. They took every achievement I had and sanded down the edges until it felt like a character flaw. They painted a portrait of me as difficult, prickly, and emotionally fragile. I became the complicated daughter, the one you had to be careful around. This brings me to the silence. I stopped sharing my life with them 5 years ago, not out of spite, but out of survival. I realized that in the Davis economy, information is currency. If I told them I loved a painting, they would tell me it was derivative. If I told them I enjoyed a new restaurant, Mark would find a health code violation report from 10 years ago just to ruin my appetite. If I introduced a friend, Diane would dismantle their character within 15 minutes, finding the one insecurity I had confided in her and using it to drive a wedge between us. Everything I loved, they touched, and everything they touched, they bruised. So I went underground. I built a life they could not see. I bought my own apartment and told them I was renting. I got promoted to senior management and told them I was still a mid-level associate. I kept my joy in a vault where their fingerprints could not smudge it. Then I met Grant. It was a Tuesday afternoon in November, exactly 1 year ago. We were on opposite sides of a commercial real estate closing in Manhattan. The deal was messy. The sellers were hiding structural issues, and the buyers were looking for any excuse to sue. The conference room was filled with shouting men, posturing attorneys, and stressed assistants. Grant Ellison was sitting at the end of the table. He was not shouting. He was not posturing. He was reading a clause in the contract with a focus that made the rest of the room disappear. He looked up, caught my eye across the mahogany table, and gave a barely perceptible nod. It was an acknowledgement. "I see you handling the chaos," that look said. "I see that you are the only one here who actually did the reading." We went for a drink after the papers were signed. It was supposed to be professional. A quick debrief between opposing counsel. It turned into dinner. Then it turned into a walk across the Brooklyn Bridge at midnight, because neither of us wanted the conversation to end. Grant was different from any man I had ever met, and certainly different from the men my parents tried to force on me. He was steady. He had an ego so low it was practically subterranean. He did not need to be the loudest person in the room because he knew he was the smartest. He listened to me. He did not listen to reply. He listened to understand. For the first time in my life, I felt seen, not assessed. I wanted to shout it from the rooftops. I wanted to tell the world that I had found someone who made the air feel easier to breathe. But then I heard my mother's voice in my head. I imagined bringing Grant to Sunday dinner. I could picture it with terrifying clarity. Diane would make a backhanded compliment about his suit. Mark would ask intrusive questions about his billable hours, implying he wasn't quite successful enough. Sloane would flirt with him just to prove she could, and then whisper to me later that he seemed a little boring. They would not just attack him, they would try to recruit him. They would try to make him part of the joke. Poor Stella. She is so intense, isn't she? You have your hands full with that one. I knew that if they got their hooks into him, they would poison the one pure thing I had. So I kept him a secret. The imaginary fiancé joke began 6 months ago. It was an accident. Diane was trying to set me up with the son of her plastic surgeon, a man who had 3 DUIs and a spray tan that looked like industrial rust. He is perfect for you, Diane had insisted over the phone. He needs someone grounded. I am not interested, Mother, I had said. Why are you planning to die alone? Is that the goal? I am seeing someone, I snapped. The words were out before I could check them. There was a pause on the line. Then Diane laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. Oh, really? What is his name? Why have we never seen him? It is new, I lied. We are keeping it private. Private? She mocked. Like your gym routine. Like your social life. Stella, you do not have to lie to me. It is pathetic. She hung up and immediately called Sloane. By the next morning, the narrative was set. Stella had invented a boyfriend to avoid rejection. At first, it stung. But then I realized something fascinating. The joke served them. It confirmed everything they wanted to believe about me, that I was desperate, delusional, and fundamentally unlovable. It made them feel superior. Mark jumped on the bandwagon immediately. For my father, the imaginary fiancé was a strategic asset. If I was mentally unstable enough to invent a partner, then I was certainly not stable enough to manage my own finances, or my own property, or my own life. It infantilized me. It kept me small. It kept me easy to steer. Every time I visited, they would ask about Mr. Invisible. How is the Phantom today? Mark would ask, pouring himself a scotch. Did he buy you that scarf? Or did you buy it and wrap it yourself? He is fine, I would say, keeping my face blank. Does he have a brother for Sloane? Diane would cackle. Oh wait, Sloane gets real men. I took it. I let them laugh. I let them sneer, because every time they mocked the idea of Grant, they proved exactly why they did not deserve to meet him. They thought the silence was weakness. They thought my lack of protest was admission. They did not understand that I was not hiding because I was ashamed. I was hiding because I was protecting a treasure from thieves. Grant understood. When I finally explained it to him, 3 months into our relationship, I was terrified he would think I was crazy. Who hides a serious relationship from their family in their 30s? We were sitting in his living room. The fire was lit. He listened to the whole ugly story, the gaslighting, the control, the way they made me feel like a ghost in my own life. He did not laugh. He did not tell me I was exaggerating. He reached out and took my hand. They do not want you to be happy, Stella, he said quietly, because if you are happy, you do not need them. And if you do not need them, they lose their audience. He was right. That was the night I stopped trying to prove myself to them. That was the night I learned the most important lesson of my life in the Davis family. Proof does not protect you. You can bring receipts, timestamps, and signed affidavits, and they will just say you forged them. They will say you are confused. They will say you are remembering it wrong. Proof is useless against people who are committed to misunderstanding you. Boundaries are the only protection, but boundaries are not just about saying no. Boundaries are about leverage. Boundaries are about ensuring that when they inevitably cross the line, there are consequences they cannot talk their way out of. For the last 6 months, while they laughed about my imaginary life, I was building a very real wall. I started documenting every conversation. I started recording the phone calls where Mark asked vague questions about my assets. I started finalizing the restoration of Foxmere House, the property my aunt left me, the one asset they were desperate to get their hands on, because it was the one thing I owned that they couldn't claim credit for. I knew this day was coming. I knew that eventually, the imaginary fiancé joke would stop being funny to them and start being a weapon. I knew they would try to use my delusion to declare me incompetent. That is why I did not bring Grant to the engagement party immediately. If he had walked in with me at the beginning, Diane would have just pivoted. She would have said, "Oh, finally, she found someone." She would have welcomed him with a fake smile, charmed him, and then spent the rest of the night undermining me to him. She would have whispered stories about my episodes. She would have tried to infect him with their version of the truth. I could not let that happen. I needed them to commit. I needed them to put their cruelty on the record. I needed 300 witnesses to see Mark and Diane Davis mock their daughter, call her a liar, and try to strip her of her dignity. I needed the room to be primed. I needed them to push me so far that when the truth finally arrived, it wouldn't just be an introduction, it would be a revelation. So I stood by the champagne tower. I listened to the laughter. I watched my father uncapping his pen, so sure of his victory. I watched my mother basking in the glow of my humiliation. They thought they were breaking me. They thought they were exposing my lies. But all they were doing was proving my point. I looked at the folder. I looked at the signature tabs. I thought about the quiet mornings I spent with Grant, drinking coffee and reading the paper. I thought about the way he looked at me like I was real, like I was solid, like I was worth knowing. My parents laughed because they thought I was alone. They laughed because they thought I had no backup. They laughed because they had forgotten that the quiet child watches and learns and prepares. They were about to find out that the only thing imaginary about my life was the version of me they had created in their heads, and that version was about to expire. The blue folder sitting on the table next to the champagne tower was not a mystery to me. I did not need to open it to know what the legal jargon on page 1 said, nor did I need to flip to the back to see the signature block waiting for my name. I knew exactly what was inside, because I had spent the last 6 months watching my parents circle the subject like sharks sensing a drop of blood in the water. The prize was Foxmere House. To the guests in this room, Foxmere was likely just a name they had heard mentioned in passing. Perhaps an old, dusty estate that belonged to my late Aunt Lydia. To my parents, for a very long time, it was nothing more than a money pit. When Aunt Lydia died 3 years ago and left the deed solely to me, Diane had actually laughed. She called it a white elephant and a burden. She told anyone who would listen that Lydia had cursed me with a rotting pile of timber in the middle of nowhere. They left me alone then. They let me drive up to the Hudson Valley every weekend. They let me pour my savings into contractors, plumbers, and historical restoration specialists. They ignored me when I talked about permit applications or the cost of slate roofing. They had no interest in a crumbling Victorian inn that was bleeding cash, but that was before. What Mark and Diane did not know, because they never asked, was that Foxmere House was no longer a rotting pile of timber. For the last 2 years, I had not just been fixing it, I had been building a business. I had restored the 6 guest suites to 5-star standards. I had hired a brilliant on-site manager. I had secured partnerships with luxury wedding planners in the city. Foxmere House was now the most sought-after boutique venue in the county. It was booked solid for 18 months. It was generating revenue that rivaled Mark's annual salary, and it was doing so entirely without their input, their control, or their permission. The moment they found out, the temperature changed. It started subtly. About 6 months ago, Diane suddenly stopped calling it that old house and started calling it the family estate. She would drop comments at dinner about how important it was to preserve our legacy, as if she had ever spent a single afternoon scraping wallpaper or negotiating with electricians. Then came the meetings with Mark. My father loves a meeting. He loves the theater of sitting behind a desk, steepling his fingers, and explaining the world to people he deems less intelligent. He started summoning me to his study on Sunday afternoons. "I have been looking at the liability structures. Stella," he would say, sliding a spreadsheet across the mahogany that he had clearly mocked up himself. "You are exposed, dangerously exposed." "I have insurance, Dad," I would reply. "I have an LLC. I am fine." "You think you are fine," he would counter, his voice dropping to a tone of grave concern. "But you are one slip-and-fall lawsuit away from bankruptcy, And think of the taxes. The capital gains alone will crush you if you don't structure this correctly. You are drowning. Honey, you just don't know it yet. He never offered advice. He offered fear. We can help you, he would say eventually. I have spoken to our family trust attorneys. We can fold Foxmere into the Davis Family Trust. We will handle the administration, the taxes, the headaches. You can just enjoy the artistic side. We will protect you. Translation. Transfer the ownership to a trust controlled by Mark and Diane Davis, losing all legal authority over my own business, in exchange for absolutely nothing. I refused. I did it politely. At first, I thanked him for his concern and told him my own accountant was handling it. That was when the tactics shifted from concern to coercion. Sloan was deployed next. My sister does not understand business, but she understands desire. She began dropping hints that were about as subtle as a sledgehammer. Brianna is getting married soon, Sloan said to me one afternoon while we were shopping. She is so stressed about venues. Everything is so corporate. That is too bad, I said, looking at a rack of scarves. Foxmere would be perfect, Sloan said, watching me in the mirror. Ideally, it should stay in the family. You know, like really stay in the family. Imagine if Brianna could actually start her life there. Not just rent it, but have it, as a security blanket. Sloan, I said, turning to face her, I am not giving Brianna an inn worth $2 million as a wedding gift. Sloan rolled her eyes. You are so transactional. Stella, it is about family. Mom says you are being greedy. She says you are hoarding it. Hoarding the thing I built. Hoarding the thing I saved. The pressure mounted. The phone calls became more frequent. Diane would call me late at night, weeping about how I was tearing the family apart by keeping secrets and excluding them from my success. Mark would send me articles about small business failures and highlight the paragraphs about foreclosure. Then the invitation for this party arrived. It was peculiar from the start. An engagement party at the Gilded Barn. This venue cost nearly $30,000 just to unlock the doors. Brianna's fiancé, David, was a junior architect. Brianna was a part-time yoga instructor. Who was paying for this? And why was the invitation so specific? The card had arrived with a handwritten note from Diane on the back. Stella, just you. Please, we want this to be an intimate family night. No distractions. No distractions meant no witnesses. It meant no Grant. I might have walked into the trap blindly if it hadn't been for the voicemail. It happened 3 weeks ago. It was a Tuesday evening, and I was in the kitchen with Grant, making pasta. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was a voicemail from Diane. I assumed it was another guilt trip about Sunday dinner. I put it on speaker so Grant could hear the latest installment of the drama. But when the message played, it wasn't Diane talking to me. It was a pocket dial. There was the muffled sound of fabric moving, and then my mother's voice came through, tinny but unmistakable. She was talking to someone in the room with her. She is stubborn, Mark, Diane was saying. She is not just going to hand it over. She will if she feels like she has no choice, Mark's voice replied. It was distant, but I knew that tone. It was his closing the deal voice. We have to corner her. The engagement party is the best leverage we have. It is risky, Diane said. It is necessary, Mark snapped. That property is the only liquid asset worth anything right now. If we don't get Foxmere into the trust before the end of the quarter, we are going to have to liquidate the portfolio. We need that equity. Diane. I froze. Grant stopped stirring the sauce. The portfolio? Diane asked. I thought we had time. We are out of time, Mark said. I need her signature. Draft the transfer. Make it look like a gift. A gift to Brianna. She can't say no to her cousin in front of 300 people. She doesn't have the spine for it. And if she reads it, she won't read it, Mark scoffed. We will do it during the toasts. High emotion, lots of champagne. I will put the pen in her hand and tell her to sign. She will do it just to stop everyone from looking at her. You know how she is. She hates a scene. There was a pause. The static hissed. Once it is signed, Diane said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "She can't undo it. We will file it Monday morning. By the time she realizes what happened, we will have power of attorney over the asset." The recording ended. I stood there in my kitchen, staring at the phone. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. It wasn't about love. It wasn't about concern. It wasn't even about control. Really, it was about money. My parents, the great pillars of the community, were broke, or at least, they were leveraged to the hilt. They had spent decades living a life they couldn't afford, and now the walls were closing in. They didn't want to help me run Foxmere. They wanted to strip mine it. They wanted to take the equity I had built and use it to plug the holes in their own sinking ship, and they were willing to ambush me at my cousin's engagement party to do it. Grant walked over and took the phone from my hand. He saved the audio file. Then he emailed it to himself. Then he looked at me. "They are counting on you staying polite," Grant said. His voice was calm, but his eyes were furious. "That is the lever. They know you are a good person. They know you were raised to never make a fuss, never ruin a party, never contradict your elders. They are weaponizing your decency. They want to steal it," I whispered, "right in front of everyone." "Yes," Grant said. "They are going to create a social situation where saying no feels like a violent act. They are going to make you choose between your property and your reputation." He took my shoulders in his hands. "So," he said, "we are going to let them try, but we are going to change the rules of the game." That was the moment I stopped being the victim. That was the moment I became the strategist. I looked at the folder on the table again. The room was still laughing at my mother's joke about my imaginary fiancé. Diane was beaming, thinking she had won. Mark was watching me, waiting for me to crumble, waiting for me to pick up the pen just to make the pain stop. They had orchestrated this entire evening, the lights, the music, the crowd, the humiliation for this one specific transaction. They needed me isolated. They needed me weak. They needed me to be the imaginary girl with the imaginary life, so that taking my real property would seem like an act of mercy. I looked at Brianna. She was watching me with wide, confused eyes. She didn't know. I realized that with a jolt of clarity, she didn't know she was the bait. She thought she was getting a wedding venue. She didn't know she was being used as a human shield for a corporate theft. Mark cleared his throat. The sound was amplified by the microphone. "Stella," he said, his voice dripping with faux patience, "we are waiting. It is a simple signature. For the family." "For the family," Diane echoed. The trap was sprung. The jaws were closing. But they had made one critical error. They assumed I was alone. They assumed the imaginary fiancé was a lie I told to protect myself. Rather than a truth I hid to protect him, they were about to meet the reality. I looked at the folder, then at the door. 7 minutes were up. I didn't pick up the pen. I picked up my glass of water, took a sip, and prepared to burn the script they had written for me. I did not sleep the night I heard that voicemail. I sat in my kitchen until the sun came up, watching the light change from gray to gold across the countertop, realizing that my entire relationship with my parents had been a long, slow negotiation, where I was the only one not reading the fine print. But the morning light brings clarity, and by 8 o'clock, I was done being the victim. I was done being the daughter. I was a property owner, and I was going to war. I did not go to the family attorney my father used, the one who sent Christmas cards to my mother and played golf with Mark on Sundays. I went to the city. I walked into the offices of Northgate and Rowe Legal Group at 9 in the morning on a Thursday. They were not a warm and fuzzy firm. They were sharks in expensive suits, specializing in high-stakes property trusts and complex business filings. I didn't want sympathy. I wanted armor. I sat across from a senior partner named Elias Thorne. He listened to the voicemail. He looked at the deed to Foxmere House. He looked at the threatening text messages I had printed out. "Here is the reality, Ms. Davis," he said, leaning back in his chair. "In property law, possession and paperwork are everything. If your parents manage to file a transfer deed, even a fraudulent one, Even when you were coerced into signing, the burden of proof shifts to you. You would have to sue them to get your own property back. That litigation could take 2 years. In the meantime, they could drain the accounts, leverage the equity, or drive the business into the ground. So how do I stop them? I asked. We don't just say no, he said. We move the target. Over the next 48 hours, we executed a maneuver that was less like filing paperwork and more like burying a treasure chest in a bunker made of concrete. We moved Foxmere House out of my personal name. It was no longer owned by Stella Davis. It was now the property of a holding entity we created, a structure called the Foxmere Preservation Trust, which was in turn owned by an LLC with a registered agent in Delaware. I sat in that conference room and signed document after document. We drafted operating agreements that explicitly stated that any transfer of ownership required a notarized resolution from the board of directors, which was just me and a waiting period of 30 days. We updated the registered agent information with the state so that any notifications would go directly to Northgate and Row, not to my parents' house, where my mail sometimes conveniently ended up. If they try to file anything against the property now, Elias told me, handing me a thick stack of finalized papers, it will bounce. The county clerk will see that Stella Davis does not own the property, the trust does, and Mark Davis has no authority over the trust. It creates a firewall. I felt a physical weight lift off my shoulders. They could scream at me. They could threaten me. They could put a pen in my hand in front of 1,000 people, but it wouldn't matter. I couldn't give them Foxmere even if I wanted to. The legal structure was a lock they didn't have the key for. But legal protection was only half the battle. Grant taught me the other half. Grant did not swoop in to save me. He did not offer to call my father and have a man-to-man talk, which is what previous boyfriends might have done. Grant respected me enough to know this was my fight, but he was excellent at logistics. They are building a narrative, Grant said one evening, looking at the spreadsheet I had started. They are painting you as incompetent. We need to build a counter-narrative. We need data. So, I began to document everything. I stopped taking their phone calls. I let everything go to voicemail so there would be a record. When Diane texted me saying, "We are just so worried about how overwhelmed you sound," I didn't reply with a defense. I took a screenshot. I replied with a time-stamped photo of me at the inn, smiling, holding a profit and loss statement that showed a 30% increase in revenue. "Thanks for the concern. Mom," I wrote. "Business is great. No stress here." I saved every interaction. When Mark sent an email detailing tax liabilities that didn't exist, I forwarded it to my accountant and had him write a formal rebuttal, which I then saved in a digital file. I was compiling a dossier. If they ever tried to claim I was mentally unstable or financially illiterate in a court of law, I would bury them under a mountain of PDFs, proving I was the most competent person in the family. Grant sat with me while I organized the files. "This is good," he said, pointing to a text from Sloan where she asked if I was off my meds. "That is harassment. Keep it. It proves intent to gaslight." It was clinical, it was cold, and it was incredibly empowering. Then came the physical security. A week before the party, I was at the inn meeting with my head of housekeeping when I saw a van pull into the driveway. It wasn't one of our vendors. It was a generic white van with Hudson Valley Maintenance stenciled on the side. A man got out. He had a clipboard. He started walking around the perimeter of the main house, taking photos of the foundation and the roof. I walked out to the porch. "Can I help you?" The man jumped. "Just doing an assessment," he mumbled. "Bank ordered it. For the refinance." "There is no refinance," I said, my voice sharp. "I own this property outright. Who hired you?" He wouldn't say. He just muttered something about a mix-up, got back in his van, and sped off. But I knew. Mark was trying to get an appraisal. He was already shopping for loans against the equity he hadn't stolen yet. I called a security firm that afternoon. 2 days later, Foxmere House was fitted with a discreet but state-of-the-art security system. High-definition cameras were installed at every entry point, disguised as light fixtures or blended into the eaves. I could see the entire perimeter from my phone. I saw when the mailman arrived. I saw when the deer came into the garden. And I saw when Sloane showed up. She arrived 3 days before the engagement party. She didn't call first. She just drove up in her convertible, looking windblown and frantic. "Stella," she called out as I walked down the driveway to meet her. "Thank God you are here." "What is wrong?" I asked, keeping my distance. "Mom is freaking out about the logistics for the wedding." Sloane lied. She was a terrible liar. She fidgeted with her sunglasses. "She thinks we might need to store some gifts here after the party, or maybe use the inn for overflow guests. She wants to know if I can have a spare set of keys, just for emergencies." It was so transparent it was almost insulting. They wanted physical access. They wanted to be able to get inside, change the locks, and claim possession while I was distracted at the party. I looked at my sister. I remembered the times we played dress-up in the attic. I remembered how I used to help her with her homework. And I realized that the sister I loved was gone, replaced by this operative who was trying to con me out of my livelihood. "Sure," I said. I forced a smile. "That makes sense. Emergencies happen." I walked into the office and opened the key cabinet. I took a key off a hook. It was a heavy brass key that looked important. It belonged to the original 1920s lock on the side service door, a lock I had replaced 6 months ago when we renovated the kitchen. I walked back out and pressed the cold metal into Sloane's hand. "Here," I said. "This opens the side entrance. The alarm code is 1234. "Thanks, Stella," Sloane said, closing her fingers around the useless piece of brass. "You are a lifesaver, really." "I try," I said. She drove away, thinking she had the keys to the kingdom. I watched her go. Then I pulled out my phone and checked the camera feed. The system was active. The real locks were secure. The alarm code I gave her would trigger a silent alert to the police if anyone actually tried to punch it into the keypad. For the final few days leading up to the party, I went method acting. I knew that for their plan to work, they needed to believe I was the same old Stella. They needed to believe I was cowed, anxious, and desperate for their approval. If I acted confident, they might abort the plan. They might try something else. I needed them to spring the trap at the party, where the witnesses were. So I played the part. I called Diane and let my voice shake. "I am just so nervous about coming alone. Mom," I whined into the phone. "I don't know if I can handle people staring at me." "Oh, honey," Diane cooed, sensing blood. "Just come. We will take care of you. We will make sure everything is sorted out. Trust us." I told Mark I was having trouble with the property taxes. "I don't understand these forms. Dad," I said. "It is all so confusing." "Don't worry about it," Mark said, his voice thick with satisfaction. "Bring the papers to the party if you have them, or we can just discuss a blanket solution. We will fix it." I let them believe they were winning. I let them believe I was the terrified spinster daughter who couldn't balance a checkbook without her father's help. I let them build their confidence up, brick by brick, until it was a tower so high that the fall would be catastrophic. Grant watched me hang up the phone after one of these performances. He was polishing his shoes for the party. "You are scary good at that," he said. "I had 30 years of practice," I replied. I looked at the dress hanging on the back of the door, the navy silk. It was armor, too. "They think they are walking into a coronation," I said, staring at the dress. "They think they are going to strip me of everything I have built, and everyone will applaud them for it." "And instead," Grant asked. "Instead," I said, "they are walking into a deposition." I was ready. The trust was funded. The cameras were rolling. The emails were saved. The imaginary fiancé was suiting up. All I had to do was walk into the barn, stand on the X they had marked for me, and wait for them to pull the trigger on a gun that I had already unloaded. The drive to the Hudson Valley usually calmed me. The winding roads, the canopy of trees that turned into a tunnel of fire and gold in the autumn, the expanse of the river cutting through the mountains, it was my escape route. But today, as I navigated the final stretch of highway toward the venue, the landscape felt less like a sanctuary and more like a closing cage. I arrived at the Gilded Barn an hour before the official start time. This was strategic. I wanted to see the stage before the actors took their places. I wanted to see the wires and the trapdoors before they were covered in flowers and tulle. The venue was impressive, I had to admit. It was a massive, renovated structure with floor-to-ceiling glass walls on one side, overlooking a manicured meadow. But as I walked through the heavy oak doors, the first thing I noticed wasn't the architecture. It was my mother. Diane Davis was not the host of this party. My aunt and uncle, Brianna's parents, were technically footing the bill, or at least, that was the polite fiction. But Diane was the one standing in the center of the room, pointing a manicured finger at a terrified catering manager. "No, no," I heard her say, her voice sharp enough to slice through the ambient jazz music. "The champagne tower needs to be 3 feet to the left. It needs to catch the light from the chandeliers. If it is in the shadow, it looks cheap. Move it." She turned and saw a waiter adjusting a floral arrangement. "And you, that tablecloth is crooked. Fix it, honestly. Do I have to do everything myself?" She was directing the staff with the proprietary air of a woman who owned the place. She was moving through the room, adjusting place cards, checking sightlines, and claiming territory. It was a power move. By acting like the hostess, she was establishing herself as the authority figure in the room. When she spoke later, people would listen because she had already trained them to watch her. I stayed in the entryway for a moment, watching her. It was a masterclass in social dominance. She wasn't just organizing a party, she was curating a reality. "Stella." The voice came from my left. I turned to see my father, Mark. He emerged from the shadows of the coat check area like he had been waiting for me. He was wearing his tuxedo, the satin lapels gleaming under the warm lights. He looked distinguished. He looked trustworthy. He looked dangerous. "Hello, Dad," I said. He stepped into my personal space, bypassing a handshake to grip my upper arms. It was a gesture that mimicked affection but felt like restraint. "I am glad you came early," he said, his voice dropping to that low, confidential register he used when he was about to lie to a client. "We need to get some things settled before the chaos starts, before the wine starts flowing." "Settled?" I asked, keeping my face blank. "I thought we were here to toast Brianna." "We are," Mark said, guiding me toward a quiet corner near the bar, away from the staff. "But we are also here to look out for you. Stella, your mother and I have been talking. We are worried. You look tired." "I am fine," I said. "You are not fine," he corrected me, his tone gentle, paternal, and completely dismissive of my reality. "You are running yourself ragged with that property, Foxmere. It is too much for one person. The maintenance, the taxes, the liability. It is a crushing weight. We can see it in your face." I wasn't tired. I was actually in the best shape of my life. I had just completed a triathlon 2 months ago. But Mark needed me to be weak, so he simply decided "I have it under control," I said softly, playing my part. "That is what you think," Mark sighed, shaking his head. "But you are not a business person, Stella. You are a creative soul. You shouldn't be bogged down in legal filings and tax codes. We want to liberate you. We want to handle Foxmere for you. Fold it into the family trust so you can just breathe." He squeezed my arm. "We are going to take care of it tonight. A fresh start." "Tonight?" I asked, widening my eyes slightly. "Here. It is the perfect time," he said, smiling. "Surrounded by family, a celebration of new beginnings. Just follow our lead. Honey, don't fight it. It is already in motion." He patted my cheek 2 sharp, patronizing taps and walked away to greet a local judge who had just arrived. I stood there, feeling the cold spot on my cheek where his hand had been. It is already in motion. I moved deeper into the room. The air was smelling of expensive perfume and anticipation. I needed a drink of water. I needed to ground myself. As I passed a cluster of high-top tables, I heard a laugh that sounded like wind chimes made of glass. Sloane, my sister, was standing with the event planner, a woman with a headset and a clipboard. Sloane looked stunning in her gold dress, the picture of the supportive cousin. She was holding a glass of Prosecco and gesturing animatedly. I slowed my pace, pretending to examine a centerpiece so I could listen. And definitely for the spring season, Sloane was saying. We want to lock in those dates early. I have already talked to a few vendors about the tent setup on the south lawn. The drainage there is much better. I froze. The south lawn? The drainage? Those were specific details about Foxmere House. Sloane wasn't talking about Brianna's wedding, which was happening at a country club in 6 months. She was talking about my property. She was talking about booking vendors for a venue she did not own, on land she had not stepped foot on in 3 years. Wonderful, the planner said, scribbling notes. And the contract? Oh, we will have the authorized signature for you by Monday, Sloane said breezily. Ideally, we want to start marketing it as a premier package immediately. My stomach turned over. They weren't just planning to take the deed. They had already pre-sold the business. They were so confident that I would crumble that they were making commercial commitments based on my capitulation. I walked past them. Sloane didn't see me, or if she did, she didn't care. She was too busy selling my future. I found Brianna near the DJ booth. She was the only person in the room who seemed to be vibrating with genuine, uncalculated joy. She was showing her ring to a group of friends, the diamond catching the strobe lights. Stella, she shrieked when she saw me, pulling me into a hug that smelled of vanilla and hairspray. You are here. Is he here? The mystery man. He is parking, I said automatically. I can't wait to meet him, Brianna said, beaming. Then her expression softened, becoming conspiratorial. She leaned in close. And Stella Mom told me, I stiffened. Told you what? About the gift, Brianna whispered. She said you are giving me something huge, something incredible. I told her that is crazy, that you don't have to do that. But she said you insisted. She said, is it your way of, I don't know, making up for lost time? My heart hammered against my ribs. Making up for lost time. That was the narrative Diane had spun, that I was the absentee cousin, the selfish recluse, and this grand gesture was my apology. Brianna, I started. You don't have to say anything, Brianna interrupted, squeezing my hand. I am overwhelmed. Thank you, really. She turned back to her friends before I could correct her. I couldn't correct her. Not here, not yet. If I told her the truth now, I'm giving you nothing. And your aunt is a liar. I would be the villain who ruined the engagement party before it even started. I backed away. I felt like I was walking through a minefield where every step triggered a new layer of manipulation. I needed to find a corner. I needed to find a wall to put my back against. I drifted toward the back of the room, where a memory lane table had been set up. It was a standard engagement party feature photos of the couple. Baby pictures, embarrassing snapshots from college. I scanned the frames, looking for a distraction. There was Brianna at graduation. There was David on a ski trip. There was Brianna and Sloane at the beach. And there, right in the center, in a silver frame that was slightly larger than the others, was a photograph of a house. It was Foxmere House. It wasn't a casual snapshot. It was a professional architectural photo. In fact, I recognized it. It was from the marketing brochure I had commissioned last year. They had downloaded it from my website, printed it, and framed it. It sat there among the family memories as if it belonged to them, as if it were already part of the Holt-Davis communal pot. Beautiful, isn't it? I jumped. A woman was standing beside me. I recognized her vaguely, Mrs. Abernathy, a friend of my mother's from the garden club. She was holding a martini and looking at the photo of Foxmere with approval. It is, I said tightly. So noble of you, Mrs. Abernathy said, turning her gaze to me. Her eyes were glittering with that specific mix of admiration and pity that wealthy women reserve for those they deem less fortunate. Diane told us everything. Selling the inn to keep it in the family, giving the proceeds to the trust. It takes a big person to admit when they are in over their head. I felt the blood drain from my face. Selling the inn. That was the story. They hadn't just told people I was giving it to Brianna. They had told people I was selling it to the family trust because I was failing. They had painted me as the distressed business owner being bailed out by her benevolent parents. I started to speak, but the words caught in my throat. If I denied it now, I would look ungrateful. I would look unstable. Oh, poor Stella. She agreed to the sale yesterday, and now she is confused again. "Excuse me," I murmured, and walked away. My phone buzzed in my clutch. I pulled it out, shielding the screen from the prying eyes of the room. Grant. They have told people a story already. I can hear the valet talking about the big announcement. That means paperwork exists somewhere. Look for it. I looked up. I scanned the room. The party was filling up. The noise level was rising. Waiters were circulating with trays of crab cakes. Diane was near the front, laughing with the photographer. Mark was checking his watch, and then I saw it. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't discreet. It was sitting on a small, round table right next to the champagne tower, the focal point of the entire room. The blue folder. It looked innocent enough to the casual observer, perhaps a guest book or a menu, but I knew that shade of blue. It was the standard heavy stock folder my father used for all his legal filings. I moved closer, circling the perimeter of the crowd until I had a clear line of sight. The folder was slightly open. I could see the edge of the documents inside, and sticking out from the side were small, neon yellow flags. Sticky notes. I squinted. I could just make out the handwriting on the tabs. They were arrows, pointing to specific lines. Sign here, initial here, notary. It wasn't a proposal. It wasn't a contract for review. It was a closing execution copy. They had prepared it down to the last detail, highlighting the signature blocks so that I wouldn't even have to read the text. They wanted me to just sign, 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 and smile for the camera. A chill went down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. This wasn't persuasion. They weren't planning to take me into a side room and argue with me until I gave in. They weren't planning to offer me money or negotiate terms. It was a presentation. They were going to announce the gift to the room, call me up to the stage, hand me a pen, and wait. If I signed, they won. If I refused, I would have to do it in front of 300 people. I would have to ruin Brianna's moment. I would have to scream no, while my mother cried and my father looked disappointed. I would have to be the crazy Stella they had warned everyone about. They had weaponized the social contract. They knew that 99% of people would rather sign a death warrant than create an awkward silence at a wedding party. I looked at the folder. I looked at the sticky notes. I took a deep breath. I reached into my bag and typed a single message to Grant. Me. It is on the table. They are going to do it during the toasts. Are you ready? The response came 3 seconds later. Grant. I am walking up the drive. Let them start the show. I slid the phone back into my bag. I smoothed the silk of my dress. I lifted my chin. My mother caught my eye from across the room. She smiled, a shark baring its teeth before the bite. She motioned for me to come closer to the front. I smiled back. Okay. Mother, I thought, you want a show? Let's give them a show. I walked toward the trap, and for the first time all night, I wasn't afraid. I was just waiting for my cue. The waiters were just beginning to clear the salad plates when the music cut out. It was not a gradual fade, but a sharp, intentional silence that made the clinking of silverware sound like gunshots. The lights in the barn dimmed, leaving only the amber glow of the Edison bulbs and a single, harsh spotlight focused on the head table. I was sitting at table 12, near the back, sandwiched between a deaf great-aunt and a cousin who was currently explaining his cryptocurrency portfolio. I had kept my head down. I had sipped my water. I had waited. Then, the microphone feedback screeched, and my mother's voice filled the room. If I could have everyone's attention, please. Diane was standing by the champagne tower. She held the microphone with a practiced ease, her other hand resting on Mark's shoulder. They looked like a campaign poster, the perfect couple, the benevolent patriarch and matriarch. We know dessert is coming, Diane beamed, her smile stretching tight across her face. But before we get to the cake, Mark and I wanted to create a special family moment, a surprise. The word surprise rippled through the crowd. People shifted in their chairs, angling for a better view. I saw Brianna look up from the head table, her eyes wide. She looked excited. She grabbed David's hand. "Stella?" Diane called out. Her voice was sweet, but it was a summons, not a question. "Stella, darling, could you come up here? We need you for this." The spotlight swung. It swept across the room, blinding guests momentarily, until it landed on me. I froze. This was it. The walk of shame disguised as a walk of honor. "Go on," my cousin urged, nudging my elbow. "They are calling you." I stood up. My legs felt heavy, but my spine was steel. I smoothed the front of my navy dress and began to walk. The barn was 80 feet long, and every step I took felt like I was wading through deep water. I could feel the eyes of 300 people on me. I could hear the whispers. "That is the sister, the one with the fake boyfriend, the one who is struggling." I reached the front. Diane reached out and pulled me into the circle of light. She positioned me between herself and the table with the champagne tower, the table where the blue folder sat. "Thank you, everyone," Diane said, addressing the room while keeping a grip on my arm that was tight enough to bruise. "You all know our daughter, Stella. And you know that this family believes in supporting each other through the hard times as well as the good." She paused for effect. A hushed silence fell over the room. She was masterful at this, creating a vacuum of intimacy in a public space. "Stella has been incredibly brave," Diane continued, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "She has been trying to manage her aunt's old property, Foxmere House, all on her own, and we have watched her. We have seen the stress. We have seen the overwhelm. We have seen the toll it takes on a young woman to carry such a heavy burden alone." I stared at the crowd. I saw Mrs. Abernathy nodding sympathetically. I saw Sloane in the front row, dabbing at dry eyes with a napkin. "So," Mark stepped in, his voice booming and authoritative. "We decided to step in. We decided that family protects family." He reached for the folder. He picked it up with both hands, presenting it to the room like it was a holy relic. "We are officially taking the burden of Foxmere House off Stella's shoulders," Mark announced. There was a smattering of applause. People thought he meant they were paying my mortgage or hiring me staff. They didn't understand he meant theft. "And," Diane interrupted, raising her voice to build the crescendo, "we are keeping it in the family, in honor of this beautiful engagement, and to ensure that Brianna and David start their life with true security. We are transferring the ownership of Foxmere House to the couple." The room exploded. Gasps turned into cheers. Guests stood up. Brianna covered her mouth with her hands, tears streaming down her face. It was the perfect wedding gift. A historic estate, a business, a legacy. It was generous. It was grand. It was the kind of gesture that made legends. "A wedding gift," Diane shouted over the applause. "A legacy for Brianna, and freedom for Stella." She turned to me, beaming. "Isn't that right, darling? You can finally rest. You can finally stop pretending you can handle it all." The applause was deafening. It was a physical wall of sound pressing against me. Everyone was smiling. Everyone was clapping. They were cheering for my dispossession. They were cheering for my erasure. Sloane stood up from her seat and walked over to Brianna, hugging her, then turned to the crowd with a microphone she had seemingly materialized from nowhere. "It is true," Sloane chirped, her voice bright and helpful. "Stella and I talked about it all week. She agreed immediately. She wants this for Brianna. She just wants to be free of the stress." Sloane turned to me, her eyes dead cold behind her smile. "Right, Stella. You just need to sign the final page to make it official, a ceremonial signing." She pointed to the folder. Mark laid it flat on the table. He opened it, and there they were, the sticky notes. They were neon yellow. Jarring against the crisp white legal paper, they were placed strategically at the bottom of the page. They weren't just markers. They were guardrails. They were designed so that I wouldn't see the text. I wouldn't see the transfer clauses. I wouldn't see that I was signing away my rights for $1. All I would see was the line where my name belonged. The photographer moved in closer. Click, click. He was capturing the moment of the transfer. The pressure was suffocating. If I didn't sign, I was the monster. I was the jealous cousin who refused to give the bride her gift. I was the unstable sister who went back on her word. I was the spoilsport ruining the surprise family moment. Diane leaned into the microphone again. The room quieted down, waiting for the ceremony. And really, Diane said, looking at me with a pitying smirk, we wanted to do this tonight because, well, we know Stella is alone, again. She gestured to the empty space beside me. Her fiancé couldn't make it, Diane said, dropping her voice to a stage whisper that reached the back rafters, because he is well. You know, he is very busy, or parking, or perhaps he is in the same place as her business sense imaginary. Laughter. It rippled through the room again. Cruel, easy laughter. It was the final nail. They were stripping me of my credibility before I even opened my mouth. She is crazy. She makes things up. She needs us to save her. Mark uncapped the pen. It was a heavy Mont Blanc, black with gold trim. He held it out to me. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked only at me. His eyes were hard, flat, and terrifying. He slid the pen across the tablecloth. It made a soft hissing sound on the linen. It stopped 2 inches from my hand. "Don't embarrass us," Mark whispered. His lips barely moved. "Just sign the paper. Stella, do not make a scene." "Everyone is watching," Sloane added, stepping up beside me, placing a hand on my back that felt like a claw. "Do it for Brianna. Don't be selfish." I looked at the pen. I looked at the signature line. Grantor Stella Davis. I looked at Brianna. She was watching me, her face glowing with expectation. She was waiting for me to hand her a future I had built with my own blood and sweat. I looked at the crowd, 300 faces, waiting for the climax of the play. I took a breath. The air tasted of expensive perfume and betrayal. I did not pick up the pen. I looked up, straight into my father's eyes. "I am not signing anything tonight," I said. I didn't shout it. I didn't scream it. I spoke it with the calm, level volume of a woman ordering coffee. But the microphone on the podium picked it up. The words hung in the air. "I am not signing anything tonight." The applause died instantly. The room went silent. It was a heavy, awkward silence. The kind that happens when an actor forgets their lines or a prop breaks on stage. Brianna's smile faltered. "Stella," Mark's face turned a shade of purple I had only seen once before, when he lost a major client. His hand twitched toward the folder. "Stella," he hissed, louder this time. "Pick up the pen." "No," I said. The silence stretched. It became unbearable. A guest in the front row coughed. A glass clinked somewhere in the back. Then, Diane laughed. It was a shrill, frantic sound. She threw her head back, laughing as if I had just told the funniest joke in the world. She grabbed the microphone, desperate to bridge the gap, desperate to pull the narrative back from the cliff edge. "Oh, listen to her," Diane cried, wiping a fake tear from her eye. "Always the comedian. She loves to tease us. She loves the drama. She is just having a moment. Everyone, she gets cold feet." She turned to me, her eyes wide and manic, pleading and threatening all at once. "It is just a signature, silly girl," Diane said through her teeth. Her voice amplified to a boom. "Stop playing games. We all know you are going to sign. You promised." "I never promised," I said. "And I am not signing." "Of course you are," Diane shrieked, her composure cracking. She grabbed my hand, physically grabbed my wrist and tried to force it toward the pen. "Stop acting like a child. Sign the paper." The crowd murmured. This wasn't funny anymore. This was physical. This was wrong. I yanked my hand back. "I said no," I repeated. "Why?" Sloane cut in, her voice sharp, trying to turn the crowd against me. "Because you are jealous. Because you can't stand to see Brianna happy. Because you want to keep that rotting house all to yourself." "Because it is not a rotting house," I said, my voice steady. "And because it is not yours to give." Mark slammed his hand down on the table. The champagne glasses rattled. "That is enough," he roared. The mask of the benevolent father slipped, revealing the bully underneath. You are making a fool of yourself. You are ruining your cousin's night. You are unstable. Stella, we are trying to help you." "Help me?" I asked. "Yes," Mark shouted. "You can't manage this. You can't even manage a relationship. You create imaginary boyfriends because you are too broken to function in the real world. Now pick up the pen and sign the transfer before I have you declared incompetent." The room gasped. He had gone too far. He had said the quiet part out loud. He stood there, chest heaving, pointing a finger at my face. He thought he had crushed me. He thought that by invoking my brokenness, he had won the argument. I looked at him. I looked at the folder with its neon tabs. I looked at the pen lying on the table. And then I smiled. "You are right about one thing, Dad," I said into the silence. "I did keep my relationship private." I turned my head toward the massive barn doors at the back of the room. "But he is not imaginary," I said clearly. "He was just waiting for the right moment to walk in." I looked back at Diane. Her smile was gone. Her face was gray. "And I think," I added, "he has seen enough." The silence that followed my declaration was not the respectful kind. It was the confused, heavy silence of a room trying to decide which version of reality to believe. I had just told them my partner was real, present, and watching, but my parents, masters of the narrative, did not even blink. To them, my voice was just background noise, a static interference in the broadcast they were carefully conducting. Diane saw the crowd wavering. She saw the uncomfortable glances exchanged between the neighbors. She saw that Mark's anger had cracked the facade of the happy family, revealing the coercion underneath. She knew she had to patch that crack immediately, or the whole structure would come down. She did not scream. She did not yell. She simply melted. Her shoulders slumped. Her face softened into a mask of exquisite, heartbreaking disappointment. She looked at me, not with rage, but with a wounded tenderness that was infinitely more dangerous. "Stella," she said, her voice trembling just enough to be picked up by the microphone. "After everything we have done for you, you cannot do this one thing." She gestured to the room, to the flowers, to the guests, as if she had paid for them herself. "We have supported you through every crisis," Diane continued, walking closer to me, invading my space with the scent of lilies and expensive hairspray. "We paid for your car when you crashed it. We paid for your apartment when you were between jobs. We covered for you when you didn't show up for Christmas. We have loved you through your moods, your silence, your episodes, and now, when your cousin needs you, when the family needs you to step up, this is how you repay us." It was a lie. I had paid for my own car. I had never crashed it. I had missed Christmas because I was working double shifts at the inn, but the crowd didn't know that. They only saw a mother pleading with an ungrateful daughter. "I don't owe you my property, Mother," I said. Mark stepped in then. He had regained his composure. Smoothing his tuxedo jacket, he moved in close, turning his back to the audience so only I could see his face. His eyes were cold. Dead things. "If you refuse," he whispered, his voice low and scraping like gravel, "you will ruin Brianna's engagement. Everyone will remember that. You will be the pariah of this family forever. No one will talk to you. No one will invite you. You will die alone in that house. Stella, is that what you want?" He paused, letting the threat sink in. "Just sign the paper," he hissed. "Save yourself." I looked past him to Brianna. She was crying now, silent tears tracking through her spray tan. Sloane was standing next to her, rubbing her back. "It is okay, Bree," Sloane whispered, but her voice was projected, pitched perfectly to carry to where I stood. "She always does this. You know how she is. She needs the attention. She can't stand it when the spotlight isn't on her." "I don't want the spotlight," I said, my voice rising slightly. "I want to leave." "Then sign and leave," Mark snapped, forgetting to whisper. Diane stepped back to the microphone. She decided to go for the kill. She decided that if she couldn't force me to sign, she would destroy my credibility so thoroughly that my refusal would look like insanity. "I am sorry, everyone," Diane said to the room, shaking her head sadly. I know this is awkward. Stella has been going through phases lately. She made a vague, circling gesture near her temple. She invents things, Diane said, to cope. First, it was the imaginary fiancé. We played along because we wanted her to feel included. We set a place setting for a man who doesn't exist. We pretended to believe her stories about his work and his travels. And now, she sighed, a long, tragic exhalation. Now she has imaginary boundaries. She thinks she can hoard a family asset. She thinks she is a businesswoman, but we all know the truth. She is unwell, and we are just trying to protect her from herself. I felt the blood rushing in my ears. The humiliation was physical, a heat that started in my chest and burned up my neck. My hands, hanging by my sides, began to shake. It was a tremor of rage, of adrenaline, of the fight-or-flight response kicking into overdrive. I clenched my fists to stop the shaking. I dug my fingernails into my palms until I felt the sharp bite of pain. That pain grounded me. It reminded me that I was real, that I was here. I looked at Diane. I looked at the 300 people staring at me with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. My boundaries aren't imaginary, I said. My voice did not shake. It was the only part of me that was steady. And neither is my ownership, I added. Mark laughed. It was a dismissive, short bark. Ownership, he scoffed. You don't own anything. Stella, you are a placeholder. He reached for the folder again. He flipped past the signature page, turning to a document in the back that I hadn't seen yet. He held it up. It was a dense page of legal text with a gold seal at the bottom. We didn't want to have to do this, Mark said, playing the reluctant enforcer. But since you are being difficult, we already corrected the title. My heart skipped a beat. Corrected the title? What are you talking about? I asked. We filed an amendment, Mark lied smoothly. Based on Aunt Lydia's original intent, the deed was never supposed to go to you solely. It was a clerical error. We fixed it last week. You don't actually own Foxmere House. Stella, you haven't for days. Asking you to sign tonight was just a courtesy, a way to let you save face, to let you give the gift gracefully. He tapped the paper. It is already done, he said. It is official. The room murmured again. This was a new twist. The guests looked at each other, nodding. Ah, a clerical error. That makes sense. The parents are just cleaning up the mess. For a second, I felt a spike of pure terror. Had they done it? Had they forged my signature days ago? Had they found a judge to override the deed? I took a step forward. Let me see that, I said. It is legal, Stella, Mark said, pulling the folder back slightly. You wouldn't understand the jargon. Let me see it, I repeated. I didn't wait for permission. I reached out and snatched the folder from his hand. Hey! Mark shouted, startled. I didn't look at his face. I looked at the paper. I scanned the text. It was a terrifyingly good forgery. It looked like a legitimate transfer of deed. Dated 3 days ago, it had the county clerk's header. It had a signature that looked exactly like mine. But then my eyes dropped to the bottom of the page, to the notary block. Grant had taught me to look at the notary block first. Fraudsters always focus on the signature. He had told me, they forget the stamp. I looked at the stamp. It was a standard. Circular seal, State of New York, Notary Public, but it was too clean. Real notary stamps, the kind used by county clerks or bank officers, are often smudged. The ink is uneven. They are stamped by tired people in busy offices. This stamp was perfect. The lines were crisp. The ink was a uniform, digital black, and then I saw the name, John Doe, Notary Public. I blinked. I looked closer. It literally said John Doe. It was a placeholder name. It was a template. They had downloaded a deed transfer template from a legal website, filled in the text, forged my signature, and forgotten to replace the sample notary name in the graphic design file before printing it on expensive linen paper. They hadn't filed anything. They hadn't gone to the county. They had gone to Kinko's. A laugh bubbled up in my throat. It wasn't a hysterical laugh. It was a laugh of pure, unadulterated relief. John Doe, I asked. I looked up at Mark. You filed this? I asked, holding up the paper. With the county clerk. Yes, Mark said, puffing out his chest. It is a certified copy. Then why did the notary sign his name as John Doe? I asked. I turned the paper around so the front row could see. Look, I said, pointing to the seal. John Doe, Notary Public. Commission expires in the year 2030, which is impressive. Considering this is a stock image from a website, Mark's face went white. He snatched the paper back from me, crumpling it in his fist. It is a draft, he stammered. That is just a draft copy, the real one is in my office. There is no real one, I said, my voice ringing out clear and strong. You didn't file anything. You couldn't, because if you had tried to file a transfer for Foxmere House, the clerk would have told you that Stella Davis doesn't own it anymore. Diane froze. What? I transferred the property 3 days ago, I said. Into a trust you don't control, a trust you can't touch. So this, I gestured to the crumpled paper in Mark's hand, is nothing but a prop, just like this party, just like your concern for me. The room went deadly silent. The shift in the air was palpable. The guests weren't confused anymore. They were witnessing a fraud unravel in real time. Diane realized she was losing. She realized the legal angle had failed. She realized the guilt trip had failed. She had one weapon left. The weapon she used to keep me small since I was a child. Personal annihilation. She stepped closer to me, abandoning the microphone, abandoning the pretense of the sweet mother. Her face contorted into a sneer that was ugly and raw. You think you are so smart, she spat, her voice low and venomous. You think hiding behind some trust makes you a winner? Look at you. Stella, you are pathetic. She grabbed my arm again, digging her nails in hard enough to break the skin. You are standing here alone, she hissed, fighting your own family. And for what? For a house. That house is the only thing you have. It is the only thing that loves you back. She leaned in, her breath hot on my ear. Stop acting brave, she whispered. You don't have a fiancé. You don't have a partner. You don't have anyone coming to save you. You are 35 years old and you are making up stories to feel important. It is sad. Stella, it is so sad. Everyone is laughing at you. She pulled back and looked at me with triumph. She waited for me to break. She waited for the tears. She waited for the little girl inside me to surrender. But the little girl wasn't there anymore. I looked at my mother. I saw the fear behind her eyes. She was terrified of me. She was terrified of the fact that she couldn't control me anymore. I smiled. It was a gentle smile. The kind of smile you give to someone who has just made a mistake they can never take back. I told you, I said softly. I looked past her shoulder. I looked toward the heavy oak doors at the back of the barn. He is here, I said. Diane rolled her eyes. Oh, stop it. No one is coming. He is just waiting for the right moment to walk in, I said. You are delusional, Mark shouted. There is no one there. Really? I asked. I raised my hand. I signaled the DJ booth. Cut the lights, I said. The DJ, panicked and confused, obeyed. The spotlight on us died. The room was plunged into semi-darkness. What are you doing? Diane shrieked. Giving him his entrance, I said. And then, the barn doors groaned. The heavy oak doors of the barn did not just open. They parted with a slow, deliberate gravity that commanded attention more effectively than any shout could have. The cold November wind swirled in, carrying dead leaves across the polished floor, but no one moved to close them. Grant Ellison walked in. He did not stride in like a hero in a romance novel. He did not run. He walked with the measured, terrifying calm of a man who knows exactly where the exits are and exactly how much the building is worth. He was wearing a charcoal suit that fit him with architectural precision, a crisp white shirt, and no tie. He looked like the adult in a room full of children who had broken a vase. The silence that fell over the room was different this time. It wasn't the silence of confusion. It was the silence of recognition. You could feel the temperature drop. Not because of the wind, but because Grant brought with him an atmosphere of absolute, non-negotiable reality. He had lawyer written in his posture, but not the ambulance-chasing kind. He looked like the kind of lawyer who sat in glass offices in Manhattan and dismantled corporations for breakfast. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at the parents. He scanned the room once, his eyes moving like a tactical laser, assessing threats, counting witnesses, noting exits. Then, his gaze locked onto me. He walked straight down the center aisle. He didn't hurry. The sound of his dress shoes on the hardwood floor was a steady, rhythmic click, click, click that echoed in the rafters. He stopped 2 feet from me. He ignored the microphone. He ignored the spotlight that the DJ had frantically turned back on. "Are you okay?" he asked. His voice was low, intimate, meant only for me. I looked at him. I saw the tension in his jaw, the only sign of the fury he was suppressing. I saw the question in his eyes. "Do I burn it down now?" I nodded once. "I am okay." He reached out and took my hand. His grip was warm and solid. It was an anchor. Then, he turned. He didn't turn to face the audience. He turned to face Mark and Diane. Diane's smile was twitching. It was a glitch in the matrix. She was trying to maintain the benevolent mother expression, but her eyes were darting around, processing this new variable. This man was not imaginary. He was taller than Mark. He was better dressed than the groom, and he was looking at her like she was a smudge on a legal brief. Mark stiffened. He puffed out his chest, an instinctive, primate response to a challenger, but I saw his hands. They were trembling. Sloane went completely still. She had stopped comforting Brianna. She was staring at Grant with the wide, fearful eyes of someone who realizes the game has changed from checkers to Russian roulette. "Who are you?" Mark demanded, his voice blustering to cover his uncertainty. "This is a private family event. You are trespassing." Grant didn't blink. He didn't raise his voice. He simply adjusted his cuffs. "I need to confirm who you are before we discuss the documents you are presenting," Grant said. His voice was smooth, polished, and deadly. He looked at Mark. "You are Mark Davis, 62, retired insurance broker, currently listed as the trustee for the Davis Family Trust." Mark's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Grant turned his gaze to Diane. "And you are Diane Davis, 59, homemaker, secretary of the local garden club." Diane flinched as if he had slapped her. "How do you—" Grant didn't stop. He turned to Sloane. "Sloane Davis, 32, marketing consultant, currently residing at 44 Oak Lane." He knew them. He didn't just know their names. He recited their details with the bored efficiency of a court clerk reading a docket. It was a power move. It said, "I have done my homework. I know exactly who you are. Do you know who I am?" "I asked you a question," Mark shouted, trying to regain control of the room. "Who the hell are you?" "My name is Grant Ellison," he said calmly. "I am a partner at Ellison, Vance, and Moore in New York City." A ripple went through the crowd. Even in the Hudson Valley, people knew that firm. It was the kind of firm you hired when you wanted to acquire a competitor or bury a scandal. "And," Grant continued, "I represent Stella Davis." "Represent her?" Diane laughed, a brittle, high-pitched sound. "She is my daughter. She doesn't need representation." "Given the events of the last 10 minutes," Grant said, "I would argue she needs it more than anyone in this room." He walked over to the table. He picked up the blue folder that Mark had dropped. He picked it up by the corner, as if it were contaminated evidence. "I am here regarding Foxmere House," Grant said, "and the fraudulent filings that were attempted against it this week." "Fraudulent?" Mark sputtered. That is slander, I told you. It was a draft, a mistake." Grant reached into his inside jacket pocket. He pulled out a folded document. It was crisp. It was real. "This," Grant said, holding it up, "is a filing trail from the county clerk's digital submission system. It shows 3 attempts to access the deed record for Foxmere House in the last 48 hours. He unfolded another page. And this, he said, is a trace of the IP address used for those login attempts. It resolves to a residential internet connection registered to Mark and Diane Davis. The room was dead silent. You could hear the wind whistling outside. You attempted to transfer a property you do not own, Grant said, his voice flat and factual. You used an unverified submission service because the official portal rejected your credentials. And when that failed, you printed a template from a website, LegalZoom, if I am not mistaken, and brought it here tonight to coerce a signature in front of witnesses. Mark's face was now a deep, unhealthy red. We were protecting her. She is incompetent. Is she? Grant asked. He walked back to me. He stood beside me, not in front of me. He wasn't shielding me. He was standing with me. Stella Davis has increased the revenue of Foxmere House by 200% in 24 months, Grant said to the room. She has 0 debt on the property. She has a perfect credit rating. She has filed her taxes early for the last 5 years. He looked at my parents. Unlike some people in this room, he added softly. It was a subtle dig, but it landed. I saw Mark's eyes widen. He knew that Grant knew about the leverage. He knew that Grant knew they were broke. This is ridiculous, Diane hissed, stepping forward. You are ruining Brianna's engagement. Get out security. I wouldn't do that, Grant said. He turned to face the crowd. He looked at the 300 guests, the phones that were now raised, recording every second of this disaster. If you continue pressuring her to sign, Grant said, his voice carrying to the back of the barn without a microphone. You are doing it in front of witnesses. 300 of them. He let that sink in. Coercion is a crime, Grant said. Attempted fraud is a crime. And right now, you are providing the evidence for both in real time. He looked at Mark. So, Grant said, gesturing to the door, we can leave quietly, or we can continue this conversation. But if we continue, I am going to start reading the text messages you sent her last week, threatening to ruin her reputation if she didn't comply. Mark looked at the crowd. He looked at the phones. He looked at the folder in Grant's hand. He realized he was surrounded. He realized that the audience he had assembled to shame me was now the jury that would convict him. You wouldn't, Mark whispered. Try me, Grant said. He wasn't bluffing, and for the first time in his life, my father looked at another man and saw a wall he couldn't talk his way over. The temperature in the room had changed. It wasn't just cold anymore. It was frozen. The laughter was gone. The mockery was gone. The imaginary fiancé was standing there, very real, and he had just nuked their entire reality from orbit. Mark looked around the room, his eyes darting from face to face. He saw the doubt creeping into the expressions of his neighbors, his golf buddies, and the local councilman he had spent years cultivating. The narrative he had meticulously constructed, the benevolent father saving his drowning daughter, was leaking water fast. He did what he always did when cornered. He tried to make the walls smaller. This is a private family matter, Mark blustered. Stepping between Grant and the audience, he held up a hand as if he could physically block the view of 300 people. We are not going to discuss sensitive financial details in front of guests. You are making a scene, sir. Grant did not step back. He simply gestured to the microphone that was still live in Mark's hand. Then stop making it public, Grant said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the air like a razor. You invited 300 witnesses to a coercion. You printed a program. You put a spotlight on her. You cannot demand an audience for the execution and then claim privacy for the defense. Mark's jaw worked, but no words came out. He looked at the folder in his hand, then at the guests. The silence in the room was no longer awkward. It was judicial. The crowd was judging him. Diane saw Mark falter and immediately stepped into the breach. She knew that facts were losing, so she pivoted to emotion. She grabbed her chest, her eyes wide and wet, channeling the spirit of a martyr. "He is manipulating her," Diane cried out, pointing a shaking finger at Grant. She turned to the crowd, imploring them to believe her. "Can't you see Stella is vulnerable?" She has been fragile for months. This man, this stranger, he has gotten into her head. He is twisting her against her own flesh and blood. She would never do this to us on her own." It was a good performance. A few guests in the back murmured. It was a plausible story, the predatory boyfriend isolating the weak heiress. Grant didn't interrupt her. He waited for her to finish. Then, he calmly unlocked his phone and tapped the screen twice. He held it up. He wasn't showing the crowd. He was showing Diane. "I met Stella 14 months ago," Grant said, his tone conversational. "Long before you started planning this ambush. And as for manipulation, let us look at the timeline." He read from the screen, his voice clear. "October 12th. You texted Stella telling her that her father was, quote, having heart palpitations from the stress of her business, unquote. You asked her to sign over power of attorney to save his life." He swiped. "October 14th. You called Stella's bank pretending to be her, attempting to gain access to her business accounts. The bank flagged it because you couldn't answer the security question." He swiped again. "November 1st. You sent her an email saying, quote, if you don't sell the inn to the trust, we will tell everyone about your breakdown, unquote." Grant lowered the phone. He looked at Diane, whose face had gone from tragic to chalk white. "There was no breakdown," Grant said. "There was only blackmail. I have the audio files of the voicemails. Diane, would you like me to play them for the room, or should we skip to the part where you discuss the tax benefits of seizing her assets?" Diane made a small, choked sound. She took a step back, her hand finding the edge of the table for support. Sloane, sensing the ship was sinking, tried to deploy the lifeboat of levity. She let out a nervous, high-pitched giggle and tossed her hair. "Okay, wow," Sloane said, rolling her eyes at the guests. "So dramatic. Seriously. Everyone, it is just a misunderstanding. Stella gets so intense, and this guy is clearly trying to be a knight in shining armor. It is kind of cute. Actually, can we just cut the cake?" She reached for the cake knife, trying to physically force the event back onto the rails. "Sloane," Grant said. He didn't yell. He just said her name. It stopped her hand mid-air. "I wouldn't touch that," Grant said. "We are not done." "Oh, come on," Sloane scoffed, turning her best smile on him. "You made your point. You are big and scary. We get it. But this is my sister. We share everything. I am just trying to help her." "Is that why you created the email account?" Grant asked. Sloane froze. Her smile stayed plastered on her face, but her eyes went dead. "What?" Grant reached into his jacket again. He pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a printout of a technical log. "On Tuesday," Grant said, addressing the room. An email account was created. Stella Davis, officialgmail.com. It was used to contact the county clerk, the liquor licensing board, and the insurance carrier for Foxmere House. The emails requested a change of address to your parents' home. He looked at Sloane. "The account was created at 4 in the afternoon." Grant continued. "The IP address traces back to a device named Sloane's iPad Pro. The geolocation puts that device at a coffee shop on Main Street, the same coffee shop where you posted an Instagram story at 4:15, captioned, 'Scheming.'" He held up the paper. It showed the side-by-side comparison, the server log, and the Instagram post. "That is identity theft. Sloane," Grant said. He wasn't smug. He sounded like a disappointed teacher explaining gravity. "You impersonated the owner of a business to divert legal correspondence. That is a felony." Sloane dropped the cake knife. It clattered against the silver platter. She looked at Mark. She looked at Diane. She looked for someone to tell her it was okay, that she was still the golden child. But Mark was staring at the floor, and Diane was staring at Grant with pure hatred. "You," Sloane stammered. "You hacked me." "I used public metadata," Grant corrected her. "You are not very good at this." A sound came from the head table. It was a sob. Brianna stood up. She looked like a ghost in her white dress. She was shaking, her hands trembling so hard her engagement ring was vibrating. "You did this," Brianna whispered. She looked at Sloane. She looked at Diane. "You told me it was a gift," Brianna said, her voice cracking. "You told me Stella wanted to give it to me. You told me she was happy about it. She is happy, Diane insisted, her voice shrill. She is just confused right now. We are doing this for you, Brianna, for your future. You used my engagement party, Brianna said, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. You invited all these people. You made me stand up here. You made me thank her. And it was all a lie. You were just using me to steal her house. It is not stealing, Mark shouted, slamming his hand on the table again. It is asset protection. We are the family. We decide what happens to the assets. This looks like theft, a voice said from the crowd. The room turned. It was the councilman Mark had been schmoozing earlier. He was standing with his arms crossed, looking at Mark with a mixture of disgust and disbelief. I have been listening to this, the councilman said, his voice carrying in the silent barn. And I have to say, Mark, this looks a hell of a lot like theft. You are trying to force a signature. You are forging documents. And you are doing it to your own daughter. She is incompetent, Diane shrieked, snapping fully into victim mode. She abandoned all pretense of grace. She turned on me, her face twisted into a mask of ugliness I had seen 1,000 times in private, but never in public. Look at her, Diane yelled, pointing at me. She is standing there letting this stranger destroy her family. She has always been like this, unstable, difficult. She sits in that house and rots. She doesn't talk to us. She isolates herself. She is mentally unfit to own a goldfish, let alone a business. She was panting. She was throwing everything she had at the wall, hoping something would stick, hoping that if she painted me as crazy enough, the crowd would forgive the fraud. She is sick, Diane screamed. She has always been the sick one. I felt Grant tense beside me. He was about to step forward. He was about to defend me. I put a hand on his arm. No, I signaled. This is mine. I stepped forward. I walked out of the shadow of the champagne tower. I walked until I was standing directly in front of my mother. I was close enough to see the veins pulsing in her neck. I was not unstable, I said. My voice was quiet. I didn't need to shout. The room was so silent you could hear a pin drop. I was quiet, I said. There is a difference. I looked at Mark. I looked at Sloane. I was quiet because I learned that anything I said would be used against me. I continued. I was quiet because you took every word I spoke and twisted it until I sounded like the villain in my own life. I was quiet because I was building something you couldn't touch, and you hated that. You hated that I didn't need you. I turned back to Diane. You call me unstable because you can't control me, I said. You call me difficult because I have boundaries, and you call me alone because you can't imagine a world where I'm loved by someone who doesn't want something from me. I took a deep breath. But you are right about one thing. Mother, I said. This ends tonight. I turned to Grant. I nodded. Grant opened his briefcase. He didn't pull out a folder. He pulled out a single, certified document with a gold, embossed seal that caught the light. It wasn't a template. It was the real thing. You can put your pen away, Mark, Grant said, his voice ringing out. And you can throw away that folder, because the papers inside are worthless. Mark stared at him. What? Stella doesn't own Foxmere House, Grant announced. A gasp went through the room. What? Diane breathed. You sold it? No, Grant said. She didn't sell it. She protected it. He held up the document. As of 3 days ago, Grant said. The title to Foxmere House and all its assets was transferred to the Foxmere Preservation Trust. The trust is an irrevocable entity. It is managed by a board of directors. And the bylaws of that trust state explicitly that no transfer of ownership can occur without a 30-day waiting period and a notarized resolution filed with the state. He looked at Mark. Meaning, Grant said, delivering the final blow. Even if you had forced her to sign that paper tonight, even if you had broken her hand to make her do it, it would not have mattered. She does not have the legal authority to give you the house. You are trying to rob a bank vault that was emptied 3 days ago. The realization hit Mark like a physical weight. He slumped. The folder slipped from his fingers and hit the floor, spilling the papers with their neon sticky notes across the hardwood. They were powerless. The entire night, the venue, the guests, the surprise, the humiliation, it was all for nothing. They had staged a grand execution for a prisoner who had already escaped. The room shifted. It was a tangible change in the atmosphere. The guests were no longer spectators. They were jurors. And the verdict was in. I saw Mrs. Abernathy pull out her phone and start typing. I saw the councilman shake his head and turn his back on Mark. I saw the waiter stop pretending not to listen. And then, the phones came out. Not one or two. Dozens of them. People were recording. They were capturing the image of the great Mark and Diane Davis standing amidst the wreckage of their own greed. Diane looked around. She saw the lenses pointed at her. She saw the expressions of disgust. She saw her friends, her garden club members, her neighbors looking at her like she was something rotting. She realized then that her favorite weapon, public embarrassment, had just been turned around. She had brought 300 people here to witness my destruction. Instead, she had forced them to witness her own. This, Diane whispered, her voice trembling with true fear for the first time. This isn't fair. Fairness, I said softly, is just accuracy. I looked at Brianna, who was weeping in David's arms. I am sorry about your party, Brianna, I said. You deserved better. I turned to Grant. He offered me his arm. Shall we? He asked. Yes, I said. I think we are done here. We turned our backs on them. We turned our backs on the folder, the champagne tower, and the family that had tried to consume me. And as we began to walk toward the doors, the only sound in the room was the clicking of camera shutters. The reveal of the Foxmere Preservation Trust hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. My father, Mark Davis, stared at the certified document in Grant's hand as if it were written in a foreign language. He blinked. Once, twice, his brain struggling to process the fact that the asset he had already spent in his mind, the equity he needed to save himself from financial ruin, was gone. Locked away in a vault he could not pick. But habits are harder to break than laws, and Mark Davis had a habit of control that spanned 35 years. When the logic failed, he reverted to the primal reflex of the patriarch. He took a step toward me. He ignored Grant. He ignored the 300 guests. He ignored the cameras. He focused entirely on me, his face flushing with the dangerous purple rage of a man who has been told no for the first time in his life. Get your things, Mark said. His voice was low, vibrating with a command that used to make me freeze when I was a child. We are leaving. Now. We are going to go home, and we are going to sit down, and we are going to fix this mess you have made. It was the old script. Isolate and conquer. Get me in the car. Get me in the living room. Scream at me until I was too exhausted to think. Until I believed that I was the one who had sinned. Until I signed whatever he put in front of me just to be allowed to sleep. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had taught me to swim, the man who had walked me to the bus stop, and the man who had just tried to rob me in front of my entire extended family. No, I said. It was a small word, one syllable, but it felt heavy in my mouth, solid as a brick. Mark stopped. He looked like I had slapped him. Excuse me. I said no, I repeated, my voice steady. I am not going anywhere with you. I am not getting in a car with you, and we are not going to fix anything, because nothing is broken. I protected my property. The only thing broken here is your plan. You are my daughter, Mark shouted, forgetting the whisper. You do what I tell you. I am 35 years old. I said, I do not belong to you. Diane saw Mark losing ground. She saw the guests whispering, pointing, judging. She knew that brute force wasn't working, so she tried to deploy the arsenal of emotional manipulation she had perfected over decades. She rushed forward, grabbing my other hand. Her face crumpled. Tears real. Wet tears born of frustration and panic spilled onto her cheeks. Stella, please, she wailed, clutching my fingers. Don't be like this. We are a family. We can work this out. Just come home with us, baby. We can undo the trust. We can find a way. We just want what is best for you." When I didn't move, the mask slipped. The crying stopped instantly, replaced by a flash of cold, hard bargaining. "Listen to me," she hissed, leaning in so close I could smell the stale champagne on her breath. "If you walk out of here, you are cut off. Do you hear me? No inheritance, no family holidays. We will write you out of the will. You will be dead to us." I looked at her. "Mother, you are broke. There is no inheritance. And as for being dead to you, I think I have been dead to you for a long time. You just didn't notice until I stopped being useful." "You ungrateful little—" Diane started, her face twisting into a snarl. "Mrs. Davis," Grant's voice cut in. It was calm, bored, and utterly final. Diane froze. She looked at Grant. Grant reached into his briefcase one last time. He pulled out a single sheet of paper. It wasn't a deed. It wasn't a trust document. It was a formal notice, printed on the heavy, cream-colored letterhead of Ellison, Vance, and Moore. "This is for you," Grant said, handing it to Mark. Mark took it automatically. "What is this?" Mark asked. "It is a formal notice of representation," Grant explained, speaking clearly enough for the front row to hear. "It states that all future communication regarding Stella Davis or the Foxmere Preservation Trust must go through my office. It also serves as a cease and desist regarding the harassment, the identity theft, and the attempted fraud we have documented tonight." Grant adjusted his cuffs. "If you attempt to contact Stella directly," Grant continued, "or if you attempt to enter the grounds of Foxmere House, or if you attempt to file any further fraudulent documents, we will not send a warning. We will file for an immediate restraining order and press criminal charges for the identity theft we discussed earlier." "You can't do that," Mark stammered. "She is family." "I can," Grant said. "And I will. I have the billing code set up already. It would be my pleasure." It was the checkmate. It wasn't just a boundary. It was a wall topped with razor wire and manned by a sniper. Mark crumbled. The fight went out of him. He looked at the paper in his hand, then at the guests who were now openly staring, judging, recording. He realized there was no room left to maneuver, but Sloane wasn't ready to let go. My sister, the golden child, was watching her social standing evaporate in real time. She saw the phones. She knew that by tomorrow morning, the story wouldn't be about Brianna's engagement. It would be about the Davis family attempting a grand larceny. She needed to fix the optic. She needed to make it look like a misunderstanding. She lunged for me. "Stella, stop!" Sloane cried out, grabbing my arm with a desperate strength. She tried to pull me toward the side door, away from the cameras. "Come on. Let's just go to the bridal suite. Let's just talk. You are making everyone uncomfortable. Stop being so dramatic and come with me." She dug her nails into my bicep. It hurt. It was the same pinch she used to give me under the dinner table when we were kids. The physical warning to shut up and play along. I didn't let her pull me. I planted my feet. I looked at her hand on my arm. Then I looked at her face. "Don't touch me," I said. I didn't whisper it. I projected it. It was a command. "What?" Sloane blinked, startled by the volume. I said, "Do not touch me," I repeated, ripping my arm out of her grip. The movement was sharp enough that Sloane stumbled back in her high heels. "You have used me for the last time." "Sloane," I said, "you stole my identity. You tried to steal my home. You are not my sister right now. You are a liability. Stay away from me." The crowd heard it. The silence that followed was absolute. Sloane stood there, mouth agape, realizing that the quiet scapegoat she had bullied for 3 decades had just grown teeth. "Stella." The voice came from the head table. It was small and broken. I turned to see Brianna. She was still standing there, tears ruining her makeup, looking at the wreckage of her party. The cake was uncut. The champagne was warm. The celebration was dead. "So the gift was a lie," Brianna whispered. "The whole thing, the legacy, it was just a lie." I felt a pang of genuine sorrow for her. She was collateral damage. She was a prop in their play. just like I was supposed to be. I walked over to the edge of the dais. I didn't go up, but I got close enough to look her in the eye. "I am sorry, Brianna," I said softly. "You deserved a real celebration. You deserved a party that was about your love, not about their greed. They didn't give you one, and I am sorry I had to be the one to tell you." Brianna looked at her aunt and uncle. She looked at Mark, holding the legal threat. She looked at Diane, whose face was a mask of furious defeat. "I think you should go," Brianna said to me. Her voice was not angry. It was just sad. "Please, just go." "I am going," I said. I turned back to my parents. They were standing by the champagne tower, isolated. The guests had instinctively moved away from them, creating a physical gap. They looked smaller than I had ever seen them. Mark looked old. Diane looked cracked. Mark looked at me, and for a second, I saw the realization hit him. He wasn't outnumbered by soldiers. He was outnumbered by the truth. He looked at the folder on the floor, the witnesses, the documents in Grant's hand. He realized that his authority, which he had wielded like a club for my entire life, was made of smoke, and I had just opened a window. Diane, however, was not ready to accept defeat. She was a creature of spite. She took a step forward, her eyes narrowing into slits. She hissed, low and venomous, a sound meant only for me. "This isn't over," Diane said. "You think you can walk away. You think you can embarrass us like this. I will make sure you regret this every day of your life. This isn't over. Stella." I stopped. I looked at her. I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel guilt. I didn't even feel anger anymore. I felt a profound, exhausting sense of completion. "It ends where I decide it ends," I said. I didn't wait for her response. There was no response that mattered. I turned to Grant. He was waiting for me, his presence a solid wall at my back. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He just offered his hand. I took it. "Let's go," I said. We walked down the center aisle. The walk felt different than the one I had made 10 minutes ago. Then, I had been walking toward a trap. Now, I was walking toward the exit. The crowd parted for us. People actually stepped back to let us pass. I saw Mrs. Abernathy staring at me with wide eyes. I saw the waiters nodding respectfully. I saw the DJ, who had been frozen in horror, awkwardly press a button. Music started to play. It was the upbeat pop song that was supposed to accompany the cake cutting. Happy. It sounded jarring, ridiculous, and perfect. We walked past the tables. We walked past the memory lane photo display, where the picture of Foxmere House still sat in its silver frame, a monument to a theft that never happened. We reached the heavy oak doors. Grant pushed one open, and the cold night air rushed in to meet us. We stepped out. The door swung shut behind us, muting the music, muting the murmurs, muting the toxicity that had defined my life for 35 years. It was freezing outside. The Hudson Valley winter was coming in fast. The air was sharp and clean, smelling of pine needles and snow. I walked to the edge of the gravel driveway and stopped. I closed my eyes and inhaled. My lungs filled with cold air. It burned, but it felt good. It felt like my own air. I realized then that my parents were right about one thing. They had planned to take something from me tonight. They had planned to take my autonomy. They had planned to take my voice. But as I stood there, feeling the warmth of Grant's hand in mine and the cold wind on my face, I knew the truth. The victory wasn't about the property. Foxmere House was just wood and stone. I could have lost the house and survived. The victory was the boundary. I had drawn a line in the sand, and when the tide came in, the line held. I had looked the monsters in the eye and realized they were just people. Small, desperate, broke people. Grant squeezed my hand. "You okay?" he asked, echoing the question he had asked when he walked in. I opened my eyes. I looked up at the stars above the Hudson River. "I am not imaginary," I said, smiling. "No," Grant said, pulling me close. "You are very real." "Let's go home," I said. "I have a business to run." We walked toward the car, leaving the barn, the parents, and the past in the rearview mirror, where they belonged. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed seeing Stella finally stand up for herself and take back control of her life. I would love to hear from you. Comment down below and let me know where you are listening from. Are you in the US, the UK, Australia, or somewhere else? Let's get a conversation going in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Maya Revenge Stories for more dramas, betrayals, and satisfying endings. Don't forget to hit the like button, and if you really loved it, smash that hype button to help this story get heard by even more people. Your support means the world to me. See you in the next video.